So somebody said I should start out with something about the business, the financial business, and I will. But let me just say at the beginning, look, I am an ordinary human being. I'm a sinner. I've had my ups and downs. I don't walk on water. I'm not even a proselytizer. I am who I am, and with God's grace, I am here, functioning. That's the most important thing. I'm a Catholic convert. With God's grace, I have been sober and clean now almost 20 years. And doors open and doors close. And the Lord has been very good to me. That's all I'll say. It's just, I am who I am. There's nothing special about it. There's a million stories like mine, believe me, a million, and we're all grateful. The business, Wall Street business, financial business has been very good to me. I have been off Wall Street since, it's been 20 years. I resigned from Bear Stearns in 1994. I started out at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. In 1973, I had been minted at Princeton Graduate School, and before then had been in college at the University of Rochester. I was trained as a monetarist. Then the left-wingers at Princeton tried to make me a Keynesian, and it didn't stick. And I went to the Fed, and the Fed taught me a lot about how the money world works, which was great. And I worked on Wall Street at one of those old, lovely, traditional white shoe firms, Payne, Weber, Jackson, and Curtis, which was a great place. And that's when I started meeting some old friends. And then I matriculated to Bear Stearns, which was also a great place. I wouldn't characterize it as a white shoe firm, but it was a very good company, made a lot of money, had a lot of smart guys in it. And the business was great to me. Made my career, made my reputation, which then led to government and politics, and which ultimately led to a new career in broadcasting. When I go to work in the morning, wherever it is, if I'm consulting in a firm, or I'm downtown or midtown, or giving a speech, or whatever, I have learned not to check my morals and my religious and spiritual values at the door. I have learned to carry them with me all day. All day. You take your hat and coat off, and you should work as hard as you can. Catholic doctrine notwithstanding, I believe in abundance. All right? and I'm working on that. In fact, a friend of mine, an old and dear friend of mine, it's sort of like you don't have to be a House member to be Speaker in Congress. Apparently, I don't have to be an ordained priest to run for Pope. I'm thinking about that. Just a joke. That was a joke. That was an absolute blasphemous joke. But in all seriousness, one of the things I've learned down through the years is that the business world, the financial world, the money world, the profit world is a noble calling. But we don't leave our integrity or our spiritual values or our religious values at the door when we check our hat and coat. And I'm not going to dwell on this, but I'm just going to say this. From my vantage point, as an alumnus of Wall Street, and I was in the thick of it, and it was very good to me, I saw as a reporter on CNBC, where I have been one way or another employed for almost 20 years, as a commentator every week, and then as an anchor, a host actually of two shows. I hosted a morning show from 11 to 12 for many years, and then for 12 years I hosted an evening show from 7 to 8. So I reported. I reported things that I'd never seen before in our business. And I will tell you, I did not like what I saw. Now you can just take this for what it's worth. I'm not here to chastise. I'm merely here to say, as I mentioned to Bob Dole in the car, when we were young and coming up the ranks, whether you were on the brokerage side or the buy-side management side, you were, in theory, supposed to help your clients. And somewheres along the way, in the midst of various crises, I think that modus operandi ethos has been lost. And I have been extremely critical of people that I know on the street who are admirable men and women, brilliant men and women, went to the finest schools, brilliant, who frankly, as it turns out, did things that deliberately damaged their own clients in order for their house to make a buck. And I don't like that. Look, one way or another, and I've always felt the financial world was a noble calling. Whether you're a doctor or a lawyer or a broker or a banker or a bridge builder or a technology guy or somebody who fixes computers and shows me how to work my, iPhone 6 Plus. The trick is, in this world, we are here to help people, to help them. And there should be no inconsistency between making a better life for those we wish to help and a better life for us and our families. That has never been inconsistent. And I think some people, not all, I don't like blanket indictments, some people in the money business have forgotten that and then tried to cover it up. And so over a period of time, 6, 8 years, I got into a heap of trouble for one reason or another, one causality or another. I became what the professional chemical dependency counselors would call a hopeless alcohol and drug abuser. And this was a story that, as you may know or not, pretty much destroyed my life as it was. It destroyed my Wall Street career. Went a long way to destroying my marriage, although with God's grace we got back together again. I've been married 27 years. And it was no fun. And all the while, I just kept exercising my will. And by this time, it's funny, time went on, I was involved in 12-step programs. I had been to a couple of rehabs. I might add my employers were very good to me, both Bear Stearns, and then later on I was a senior editor of National Review, Bill Buckley's magazine. They sent me away to treatment centers and still didn't take because I wouldn't give up my will. And I wouldn't say in the morning to God, God as I know him, that I will turn my will and my life over to your care and direction. I wouldn't say that. And then I guess at some point, and this has all been chronicled, and I congratulate the New York and national press for taking such a strong interest in my life. I just never knew they cared as much as they did. But I changed. I was forced to change. I was on my knees. I had nowhere else to go. And I either changed or I would die. The great thing about various spiritual and religious training is one of the things you learn that it is we who have to change. God is a constant, a universal. He is our direction. He is our light of the light. He is our prince. It is we who have to change. And that's a hard lesson to swallow for me. For me. You may have been there. God bless. I had to learn it. I did not come from a religious background. I did not come from a spiritual background. I was born into a Jewish family who lived 50 years in a place called Englewood, New Jersey, which is a great place to grow up. It's one of those great New York suburban waspy towns. As I say, my parents were nominally Jewish. They went to temple once a year, maybe. But mostly I remember is that as Jewish people, they didn't really care for other Jewish people. This is a particular genre you find in certain suburbs around the country. So, I learned to play tennis at a club that had no Jews. I went to local prep schools that had no Jews, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let me just say I did not, therefore, come from a tradition of faith. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. And I needed faith. Later in my life, as I hit bottom, it's funny, I remember this. At what is now called the Dwight Englewood School, it's a pretty fair local prep school in New Jersey. In those days, you actually said the Lord's Prayer. You actually had in homeroom a little bit of chapel in those days. I don't think you can do that anymore. ACLU and God knows the 10th Amendment. Eric Holder himself would probably come and visit your school. But in those days, you actually put your head on your desk after a little bit of commentary from your teacher and said the Lord's Prayer. You said the Lord's Prayer. And I will just say that at my worst moments, I remembered to say the Lord's Prayer. And it gave me a little bit of hope. It gave me a little bit of hope. And I will never forget it. My spiritual journey is, as I say, about 20 years old. I've had a lot of help from a lot of great people. My wife gave me a one-way ticket to the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport in the spring of 1995, and she enrolled me in the long-term care program at a place called the Hazelton Foundation, which is a miracle place. It's America's first, I think, really spiritual big book, Bill Wilson, Alcoholics Anonymous place, going back to the late 1940s. And I was under lock and key for 6 months, and that's exactly what it took. And I learned a lot. I'm not going to bore you with that. I just say I learned a lot. Mostly I learned how to change. And I learned the necessity each day of attempting to follow God's will, not mine. And to this day, I will tell you, I don't know exactly what God's will is, but I know what He doesn't want me to do, which is to drink or drug or be nasty or mean or hurt people. I believe He wants me to understand the golden rule, do unto others as they would you. And maybe read Lord Jesus' Sermon on the Mount from time to time. I came to Jesus later. I had been counseled by a wonderful man, Father C. John McCloskey, who's a well-known priest in certain circles in New York and Washington. The first time I ever went to a Catholic Mass, I fell in love with the Mass. I fell in love with the rituals. I fell in love with the rules. I fell in love with the candles. I fell in love with the water. I fell in love with the smoke. I fell in love with all of it. I love the uniforms. To this day, I love the uniforms. More than anything else, I'd like one of those tailored white with green sash uniforms. Really want one. And it took a while to take. I mean, I had to get sober first. That was my advice from my counselors. And they told me, look, you get sober for a couple of years and then, go where you feel comfortable in going. And they said you can't go back to New York City because that was the scene of the crime. We want you to go to the other side of the country, California. And they found a sober men's house for me in Southern California outside San Diego. I know there are plenty of drugs in Southern California, but I didn't know where they were and couldn't get them in 10 minutes. So it was a whole new life. Eventually my wife drove out there, and with God's grace we resumed our marriage. Eventually I came back to the New York area and was baptized into the church, I guess November 1997, something like that, St. Thomas More, in a beautiful church on 89th and Madison. And eventually we moved. We had a place in Connecticut, and I became very active in Catholic life up there. In fact, we built a church, St. Patrick Church in Reading, Connecticut, which is very unusual. Most of the time in America, churches are being torn down. We actually built one, and it was a great pleasure to be an important part of that. My friend Jeff Matthews and his wife Nancy ran the diocese. We had bishops and things like that. She ran the diocese, and she was a great help for me. She still runs the diocese. They're retired down here in Naples, but when I have a problem in the Bridgeport diocese, can you imagine that? I'm dialing Naples to find out what I'm supposed to do in Bridgeport. And so what's happened to me? Christ has risen. Christ has died. Christ has risen. Christ will come again. Even without knowing it. Even without knowing it. At a time in my life back in the early 90s when I began to change and received God, and the church received me, and followed these principles, which are almost identical to my 12-step program, things got better and better. There were issues on, we have our ups and downs. You have to play the hand that's dealt you in life, but there's a way to play it. And almost without knowing it, my life changed, my career changed. My career changed. And although I love my work as an economist and occasional investment advisor and so forth, I became a professional broadcaster almost without knowing it. I mean, I didn't even see it coming. I was one of these guys who was a guest and enjoyed being a guest and spewing forth and whatnot. And then all of a sudden I was doing it full time every day, twice a day. Never saw it coming. And that in turn changed my life. Changed it, broadened it, challenged it, gave me opportunities that I never dreamed possible. And I'm still doing it. It's a little lighter way now. I went 12 years every night on the air from 7 to 8 p.m., 3 of them with my great pal Jim Cramer, 9 of them alone, until I just couldn't do it anymore. I mean, you wake up in the morning and the anxieties are there, and I'm not getting any younger. And anyway, I checked with some of the PR people at NBC, and he said, you really outlasted most of our soap operas down through the years. And I know they were lousy soap operas, but I outlasted most of them. And so, they were great to me. CNBC rewrote me a contract, and I'm a 2 or 3 times a week commentator, and I'm still vastly overpaid, and I love doing the work, and I will continue to do it for as long as I can. And I'll just say this. Sometimes you really have to get slammed to wake up. You don't know how good your life is until and unless you lose it. And the stuff we take for granted should never be taken for granted, ever. The benefits and the graces come from Lord Jesus. That is what I learned. If you abide by his teachings in some general, simple way on a daily basis, he will reward you, whatever that reward is. I can share with you that he has rewarded me with gifts beyond anything I dreamed possible. And for that, I am grateful.